Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Tryon. Welcome back. We are crafting, sewing, and making all kinds of wonderful things for 24 hours to kick off the Christmas season and Black Friday and all the super cyber deals that are going on right now, although it's in store and online. So you can check us out at homemade.ca. And we are featuring projects and products that we love and are inspired by. And this hour, we've got such a cute project. Okay, I'm going to show you on my computer what I'm making. I'm partway through. I've started some and still have a ways to go. Let me show you. I've got look at this. This is the freestanding lace and freestanding applique gingerbread house. The files are on 40% off from OESD. Our friends at OESD are giving everybody 40% off. And I'm making that top left one, the Sugar Chalet. And the way they kind of come together is very, very cool. I've started them already. I've been like stitching the night away, honestly. And I'm going to continue as we go on here. This is the back part of the roof. And I've got all of these. This is the sides of the house plus the roof again. This is the floor. And some little embellishments and the roof line, all made of thread. Basically what we're doing here is we're making our own lace. And if you tune in a bit later on, or perhaps you've watched, we're doing a Christmas card made of, yes, I hooped up the paper. Yep, I'm going to show you how to do that. And embroidered right into the cardstock, and then added this lace overlay, all out of thread. I used polyfast thread from Wonderfil, which is my favorite thread for all kinds of reasons, but I love it in the embroidery machine. And we're going to talk thread as I do a bit of work on my gingerbread house here. Let's bring in Callista, who's live with us from Calgary at Wonderfil. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show today. I'm excited to be part of this 24-hour event.
We're going to need some coffee, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I know. But I'm happy to have you here. And let's just kick things off with, I showed you the little gingerbread house before we were starting.
Oh, they're so cute.
And there is tons of little pieces. It's definitely a labor of love. But it's so cute because this is the kind of thing that even if you made one, sort of like when you buy a little porcelain house for your Christmas village every year and you add to it, you know, if you get the collection, you can make one every year and then add to it. Because I've got about 10, hoopings of different things here. And it's taken me like about 3 nights of just sort of like setting up the embroidery machine and letting it go, watching a show on Netflix, and you know what I mean? And just having it stitch out.
I mean, I feel like now's the time to do that. Like find some cozy crafts, and now like Netflix and all the Hallmark Christmas movies are just coming out like constantly. So it's like the perfect time to work on these projects with that in the background.
Yeah, 100%. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, sort of the thread journey when you're making stuff like this, or really when you're sewing in general, because oftentimes it's like, oh, what do I have in my grandma's old sewing box? I'll just yank it out and put it in. And so often we see it, especially when people are bringing their machines in to be cleaned and repaired.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you're using all kinds of old, super fluffy, not so great thread? Now, granted, you work and are invested in Wonderfil, but you also have so much thread knowledge. So, is it the end of the world if we use cheap old thread? Or, I mean, my point of view is that we really will see a difference over time when we make the transition. I'm not saying don't use what you have, but when you make the transition to using really good quality thread.
I mean, you're definitely going to notice the difference when you use a nicer quality thread. I think that goes with almost any kind of hobby that you're ever involved with, right? Like, are you going to buy the $50 bike and try to do like a 50 km ride? Are you going to get one that's like 800 or $1,000? There's a huge difference in terms of like the performance or your
Right.
experience using that item. And like, you wouldn't go to the dollar store and try to paint with the paints you get there versus, going to like a dedicated paint shop and getting some really nice oil paints. And that's the same with thread. So even though you can make something with the thread that you have, the result you might achieve at the end might not be exactly what you want sometimes, and as well the experience of with sewing with thread that's not as good quality. Like you said, it's going to like gunk up your machine, which requires more frequent servicing, and just in general, it's like not as good for your machine to have like things that might gum it up from the inside because it's difficult to clean that out
Mhm.
and have that build up over time. And as well, when you're using thread that's not as nice, sometimes you get like breakages or like shredding, things like that, which just affect your overall experience in the sewing journey that like can make a project like less fun to do if you're not using something that's going to be
Right.
fun to like make and not give you a headache while doing it, especially when you're doing like a big project that's like entirely made of thread too. I
Yeah.
think it matters, especially with freestanding lace where you don't even have fabric in play. It's pretty much your thread that is the whole project.
Well, exactly. And when I look at like this beautiful lined, like the snow line of the roof of, so when this comes together, this piece is going to go over top of this piece here like this when I get it all together and I wash away
Mhm.
the stabilizer. But talk to me a little bit about, so I chose Polyfast for this project.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about why Polyfast is great for making lace and things like this.
Well, Polyfast is a 40 weight trilobal polyester, and I think it's a great choice for any type of embroidery in general. I think it's a weight that most people that do embroidery are really comfortable with and is a popular choice for a good reason. Like it's gonna give you a really beautiful finish. It has a nice sheen to it, and especially with something like freestanding lace, where you need to have some, like, structural integrity to the pieces that you make to keep it, like, three-dimensional, especially with the gingerbread house there. Um, Having, like, a 40 weight will kinda keep its shape a little bit better. There's, like,
Mhm.
different instances where you might wanna use a different thread type here and there, but for this example, 40 weight is definitely a beautiful choice and gives you, like, a really nice sheen. Trilobal polyester is essentially a type of polyester where the shape of the thread is kind of triangular in shape, trilobal coming from that name, and so it has kind of sides to it that help reflect the light more. So that's why it's got such a beautiful sheen to it. And I think it always looks great in an embroidery project. And it's one of my favorite picks too when I think about what to do or what to use for embroidery.
Well, it's one of those things where, sometimes people have a hard time remembering like 30 weight, 40 weight, polyester, rayon. Like they're just like, so we sometimes just tell people like, if you're in doubt, choose something with a bit of a sheen to it. And you talked about that shine and it being so beautiful on embroidery projects. Is there's just like that triangular shape? Does that help it
Mhm.
move through the needle? What's the benefit there? Can you go a bit?
Whether it's a triangular or more circular, like the shape of the thread, it's not going to have problems going through your needle. Of course, you always want to match the right needle size to your thread, but just the shape of the thread is kind of just so that it kind of is able to reflect more light, so that gives you that sheen a little bit more. Sometimes it
Right.
almost looks like sparkly in the light, the polyfast. And so it's especially when you're doing embroidery most of the time, embroidery is like a type of embellishment, right? You want to see it. You're doing it because it's decorative. So you kind of pair it with a thread usually that would show, and especially in this type of project, this is something you want to show and something that you want to stand out and look pretty and nice when you have it out on display.
And what's your advice for the bobbin? I'm just pulling some of this water-soluble stabilizer off before I melt it into the water, because that's what happens if you're new to this. If you use water-soluble stabilizer in your hoop, so if you hoop up, like I've got here, just a hoop full of stabilizer only. It's water-soluble, which means if I run this under the sink or dunk it in water, it's just going to melt away. But while it's dry and solid, that polyfast thread that Callista's talking about, the machine's stitching it in here as though it's going into fabric. And the structure of the design is such that it's meant to have that wash away and remain its own object then. So that's how we're getting the roof of the gingerbread house here and all of the surrounding area, is because it was on that water-soluble stabilizer. At one point, I laid just a little piece of that brown fabric down, and then it stitched all around it and gave me all kinds of little points that I'll be able to build this house. So that's how this comes together. If you're kind of going, huh? How are they doing that? And I'll go ahead and I'm going to get this going in just a second. But Calista, talk to us a little bit. If we're using polyfast on the top, with freestanding lace, there's sort of a general rule about make sure you're matching the bobbin thread to the top thread. So should we be using, if we're doing white, polyfast on the bottom too? Or would you say go ahead and use Deco Bob?
Well, using different weights of thread and using the same color is kind of, it's different in my opinion. For example, like we always use Deco Bob in the bobbin, no matter what we're using on the top, whether that be Deco Bob as well on the top, or polyfast, or even heavier weight threads like spaghetti or glamour, or even super lightweight threads like Invisifil. We're always just using Deco Bob in the bobbin. And I would say that this is especially important when you're doing embroidery, because you don't really ever want to put more thread than you actually need into a project. And using a lighter weight thread keeps your designs and your stitching like nice and soft, and like reduces the bulk in the project as well. And actually, when we tell people to use pre-wound bobbins like the ones that you have there, it's not just about the convenience of having, like, a pre-wound bobbin that you don't have to go and stop your project and, like, go wind another bobbin. That is always nice to have, that's a plus for sure, but I always tell people it actually gives you, like, a better result in your stitching than winding your own
Is
bobbin.
it
If
because
you
of the
don't mind.
tension?
Yes, it is. It's because, when they come on the, come from the factory, they're perfectly wound. If you think about it, the thread that you use in the top is going to come with really nice tension because they're wound in the factory. So when they come off the spool, they should have really good tension on them, and there shouldn't be like parts that are wound extra tight or extra loose that might affect your tension on the top. But if you think about your bobbin, that's something that you usually wind yourself. So there is like variables and like how well your machine can wind a bobbin, and your machines are never going to wind them as perfectly as how they come factory wound. So
That's for
factory
sure.
wound, right? So factory wound bobbins actually have like really perfect tension, which actually gives you a better result in your stitches than winding your own. If you don't mind, I'd love to screen share an example.
Sure. We're all
Okay.
about the threaducation here. We love learning about, I mean, we've spent a small fortune on sewing machines and supplies. We may as well know how to get the most out of it.
For sure. So I'm just going to share my PowerPoint here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let me know if you can see this.
Yeah, we'll bring you up full screen so people can see. Yeah.
For sure. So, if you can see, the one on the left is
Yep.
a self-wound bobbin, and the one on the right is a factory wound bobbin. So you can even see within like just how flat that factory wound bobbin is, you can see how perfect it's wound on there versus on your machine. Like machines are getting better and better, but they're never still going to give you as perfect a perfectly wound bobbin like it is gonna be coming from the factory on, like, much larger machines that are made just to wind bobbins, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Karin, we've got Damien here. Go ahead. Um, sorry, we're just doing a little behind the scenes here. That's so interesting
Sure.
with my bobbins are often like
Mhm.
winding, and I've got amazing access to all kinds of great sewing machines. So it's the kind of thing that even though I've got really great sewing machines, sometimes my bobbin like is like more thickly wound at the bottom than the top. And
Exactly.
sometimes I put my finger underneath the thread so it goes up a little bit
Guide
more.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, I do this all day every day and I even know that's wrong, but I still do it.
Yeah.
And I will say where this project, you can see I'm well through my pack of pre-wound bobbins,
Yep.
and it yes, it was convenient and I had no problem. The only thing I'll say is if you're making lace like the tree trim here, or like the roof trim that's all white,
Yep.
if you were doing another color and making lace, you do want to make sure that your color matches the back and the
Yes.
front. That's the only stipulation. But because Deco
Yep.
Bob comes in white, I wasn't worried.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. So I'm just gonna show one more photo
Yeah.
in the next slide here. So you can actually see on the left side of the screen, it's actually we split the teardrop in half. The left side is still Deco Bob, but self-wound, and on the right side, it's Deco Bob with a pre-wound. You can see
Oh,
how
no
much more
way.
yeah, you can actually see how much more consistent the stitches lay, and it actually I don't know how, it just, like, fills it better as well. But yeah, it
Wow.
actually gives you, like, a better result. So it's not just about, you know, being convenient, it actually gives you um, a better result.
Wow.
And
And that
like
actually really,
yeah.
I really saw that on the little gumdrops here that
Mm,
are making up the roof tiles. This nice, like you can see I used the Deco Bob because it's white at the bottom.
yeah,
Um, and like really got a nice consistent finish. So I didn't even realize that was going to be the difference. So all right.
for
Yeah.
sure. And I think what you were saying earlier about whether we need to match the same thread top and bottom, like I mentioned earlier, we use all types of threads on the top with Deco Bob always in the bobbin. I always tell people your threads are kind of just like holding hands on the fabric. And just like in real life, we can be a tall person and a short person and we can still hold hands. So that's the same with your threads. They can be a thicker thread and a thinner thread and they can still work together. And
Now,
when it
what do you
yeah.
say? Let me just ask you, because there's so many,
Mhm.
like 300 colors of polyfast. There's so many
Yeah,
colors. So do you just suggest matching up one that's close?
exactly. So that's the other beauty of Deco Bob because it's an 80 weight thread. So even if you get pokies, which is why people worry about matching their bobbin thread to the top when they're doing embroidery, for example, they worry about those pokies showing.
Is that
Um,
the bottom thread showing up top? I've never what's
Yeah,
yeah,
the bottom thread showing up top because
yeah.
80 the Deco Bob 80 weight's so much finer, even if you do get that, it's not gonna show as much. So you just have to pick a thread or pick a color that's pretty close, and we have increased some of the color selection for Deco Bob. Of course, it's not as close to Polyfast where there's
Mhm, yeah, yeah.
210 colors because you really don't need it. The thread is so fine that it's going to hide, even if it's not an exact color match. And in the more common colors, like we have enough range to like cover the ones that most people are going to choose or worry about getting an exact match on. Like white is obviously important because it can show through the top if you use a color like you mentioned earlier. But if you're doing freestanding lace, if you're gonna see the front and the back of it, then I would try to match just as closely as you can. But in other instances with the embroidery if it's just you're only gonna see the front and not even really the back, I kinda just use a neutral color all the time,
Yeah.
and I don't even really match really that close.
Yeah, I just used white on pretty much everything here. What else do you have to show us? You had a couple slides there. Was there another one?
Yeah, so I was just kind of gonna show because we're talking about like Polyfast and like Deco Bob a little bit. I have a few more images that I can show as well, kind of
Yeah,
relating to those two threads since we're talking about them.
sure.
Um, Let me just go back to my presentation here. So
Yeah,
this is kind of like what we talked earlier, that there's just kind of like different weights of thread. And you can see here, there's really quite a variety to choose from. So 40 weight would be where that polyfast is. And I put
just
them
click on that.
in a category 2 because I find them to be kind
Mouse.
of just like standard weight threads that everyone is used to using. And then in category 3, where Deco Bob is in the 80 weight, that is what I would consider a lighter weight thread. So you use this because you want it to either be more delicate or you don't want to see it as much. And I have a good example with some embroidery here. This is kind of just a bit of monogramming,
Yeah.
but you can see in the top left corner, we
Yep.
used a heavier weight than the 40 weight. So I think that's about a 30 weight. And you
Uh-huh.
can see it looks bold, it looks textured, and it's cool. But when you want to shrink the design smaller, in like the very left lady in the top left corner, there's like sets of 3 or 4 ladies
Yep.
in every quadrant. You can see that you start losing some of the detail.
Yep.
Right? So then if you go right below it, that's actually Deco Bob. So that's the 80 weight. And you can see we can
Oh,
make the
wow.
lady the same size and even shrink her further because that thread is so fine. So if you're doing like lettering or monogramming or even a different type of freestanding lace where you want it to be kind of like that more lacy, delicate type of freestanding lace, Deco
Uh-huh.
Bob is amazing for that.
So use
And
it on the
then
top and bottom.
yeah, you can use it in the top and bob and in the bobbing, so
Cool.
that's the beauty
Okay.
of that. And then, like, the top right corner is going to be your polyfast, and that's just nice, beautiful, standard that you know what to expect, so it's never really a guessing game when you use that 40 weight. It's just a
Uh-huh.
really great go-to.
Yep.
And then on the bottom, it's if you wanna push it even further, we've even used Invisifil in the embroidery
Wow.
machine. Yeah, so you get an even finer, more delicate look as well. And so this is just kind of a picture of Polyfast and the Deco Bob. So one's a trilobal polyester and one's a cottonized polyester. So Deco Bob is a cottonized polyester. It doesn't mean that there's any cotton in the thread. It's still 100% polyester. But what we've done is we've treated the thread so it's not going to shrink or pucker in your seams because a lot of people use Deco Bob for piecing, and it's got more of a matte finish as well, so it really blends in really nicely.
Yep.
And this is actually an image I kind of created of Polyfast, I guess, if we zoomed really closely to kind of give you an idea of like, it kind of has like a few three faces that help reflect light a little bit more. It's a filament thread, so it's like a continuous strand, and that shape is kind of like how that filament looks. And I wanted to talk about another thing as well, which is 2-ply versus 3-ply. So, 2-ply threads are like Deco Bob are going to kind of sink into the fabric a little bit more. So they help hide better. So even again, like what we said earlier, if they ever show and you have pokies, it really hides really well. And the thread is so fine. So you're really not going to see too much of it at all. And a 3-ply thread is going to be a little bit rounder in shape. So that helps it sit usually on top of fabric more, and it's usually going to be more more common in threads that are decorative because you do want to see those threads more.
And
And
so
that's just kind of
let me
like a
just ask
picture
you
of that.
something here. If you
Yeah,
are finding, because I know it's a common thing
yeah,
with your embroidery machine, is to see the bottom thread poking through the top sometimes. You're calling them pokies.
yes. Yeah, I call them pokies.
Yeah. So what are you saying is the remedy for that?
So the remedy for that is really using a lighter weight thread. Using
On
a lighter
top?
weight thread in the bobbin,
In the bobbin. Yeah.
really helps with those pokies. If you just give me a second here, I'm actually gonna we're talking about pokies. Pull up a picture that really demonstrates that example.
Sure. Because I know, like, it's sometimes, we have these projects, and they can really be kind of destroyed, like the
Yes.
look, by having the wrong color thread popping through onto the front of your project. So I know that's something a lot of people really, you know, struggle with.
Exactly. It is something to really think about because it like you said, you put so much time. Like you were saying that it took you, like 3 days to
Yeah.
do all the setup for this and everything. So like it does take a lot of time to do these projects and we invest a lot of like, our energy and kind of like, oh, what we hope it will be. So like
Mhm.
choosing and using the right threads will hopefully get you there as well and won't affect, like, how how it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much white thread all along. Then you change it to the red, and then the white comes over the fabric, and there really is so much. If it was, you know, it takes, I think this stitch out was 93 minutes. So, if you get to minute 92 and then suddenly it's like kind of not going your way, it feels rough, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Alright, so I have the picture to show you,
All
so
right,
let
let's see.
me let me just share screen again here.
Yeah.
So let me know if you're able to see this.
Yeah, we can see it.
So we've kind of done a little test here where we've used a yellow color on top and then a white bobbin thread on the bottom.
Uh-huh.
So if you can look at the first part, which is like the first triangular section, we
Yep.
actually used a white 50 weight bobbin thread. So I know embroidery, a lot of people might use 40 weight, which is even heavier than 50 weight. So you can actually see that there are some pokies and like it's not super obvious, but, like, you can actually see it affects the embroidery, especially when you compare it to the second part of this embroidery, where we actually switched it to an 80 weight white deco bob. So even though we're still using white in the bobbin, look at
Mhm.
how
It just
well
looks
that
like a chunk,
fills.
right? Yeah.
It actually looks like it feels better, even though it's the exact same design, and all we did was change the weight of the thread. So not even the color of the bobbin thread. All
Yeah.
we changed was the weight of the thread. So you
Mhm.
can see um, where that white kind of shows more obviously in the first part, it like doesn't even show in the bottom. And I'm sure there might be a few here and there, but you're not going to see it really at all, like what I said earlier, even if it comes up because it's so fine, it
Right.
hides it hides even better. And then it looks like a fuller design actually compared to the top part.
Yeah, it really does. It looks like it's got, like, batting underneath it almost. Like, it's really, it's really got a lot of good texture there for sure. For sure.
Yeah,
Funny
and
how just
so
making these
that's
small
not even
changes.
matching.
Yeah, that's incredible how just these small changes can affect, your overall outcome so much, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah, so that's why, like, Deco Bob is 100% like my go-to, especially if you're doing machine embroidery. And I know you mentioned earlier that you were saying, oh, you can use Deco Bob in the top as well. So I do have some kind of freestanding lace photos with
Yeah.
Deco Bob in the top and in the bobbin
Oh, let's
that
see,
I
yeah.
can kind of show you here. So let me just go back to my PowerPoint. So this is I'm not su are you able to see it?
Yep.
Yeah, so I would always say, like, you should think about what type of effect you want your embroidery to have, and also kind of, like, what type of material that you wanna pair it with, because sometimes you wanna match, like, heavier weight things with, like, heavier fabrics and lighter weight threads with lighter fabrics. So here we're obviously making some kind of, like, doily type
Yep.
freestanding lace where you want it to be, like, softer and, like, more delicate, and that's definitely when you want to actually move to a lighter weight thread sometimes too, because it'll like drape a little nicer, it's a little softer, and you can really see the detail you can get using that 80 weight.
Wow.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Okay, that for sure. Because you know what? I've just spent like, the last little while making lace with the 40 weight.
Mhm.
And now, granted, this is a gingerbread house and it can look like chunky icing. That's totally fine.
Exactly. That's what
Um,
I'm saying, like, you need to pair it with the project, because like, I would not recommend the 80 weight for the gingerbread house, it's
no,
gonna look way better
yeah,
in the 40 weight for sure.
but this little like doily, you know, you might kind of go, oh yeah, but it only ever makes kind of really thick lace. And I want something very, very fine. Like if you were doing a wedding veil
Mhm.
or,
Exactly.
something like that to embroider out the lace in the deco bob, that's amazing.
Yep. And, just to kind of like, give you an idea, like what I mean by pairing it with the fabric that you might be using it on. Like you mentioned just now, using the 80 weight on the wedding veil. We've had customers that do that as well. And this is like an example, like if you did 80 weight on the denim, the fabric wouldn't match the weight of the thread very well. It'd
Yeah.
be kind of odd to have such a fine like thread
Yeah.
on like such a heavy material. So here we used like the 50 weight confetti, but then if you use kind of like
Oh
a
yeah.
lighter weight material like that, you know,
Yep.
then I would match it with something with like the deco bob.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Top.
like matching it to the project. And this owl, we did some freestanding lace on the edge with
Uh-huh.
polyfast, and here you
Uh-huh.
kind of wanted to maintain a bit of its shape. So that's why polyfast would have been a better choice here than the deco bob. So
Yep.
it's not really right or wrong to use either or for freestanding lace, or any type of thread really. You can use all of them for freestanding lace, but you really want to consider how the project's going to be used and how you want it to look and feel when you're finished with it.
Yeah, that's a really good tip for sure. Oh, look at how nice and delicate. Yeah.
Yeah, this one's actually polyfast. So it's like a looser lace. It's not totally freestanding, but it's kind of like a lacy thing that we
Yeah,
put on a project here.
we did something similar in our last homemade event where we were making earrings, and they have sort of
Mhm.
a mesh base, and
Yeah.
so that the real lace kind of gets embroidered into that loose mesh. It's a very cool technique for sure, and it's just sort
Yeah.
of mind blowing that you can make this stuff yourself. You know?
It actually is, and you can also mix different weights and types of threads in the same project. So here is actually like polyfast plus obviously you can see some metallic being used, and it's the perfect time of year to use metallic
Yeah,
thread. And other times of the year you might want to do like glow in the dark stuff with freestanding lace, and kind of create
totally.
some cool effect with that.
Yeah, yeah, that's very fun. Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're just past that part for sure. Oh my gosh, so many good ideas. And and it's just like such a better way to make use of your equipment. Because if you're spending, let's say, $10 on any old spool of
Mm,
thread, they're all around, they're between like $8 and less than $20. You know what I mean? Like this is the
mhm.
range where you're buying a spool of thread. And
Yep.
so you may as well get the one that is right for the job that you're doing and have your project really sing versus just buying thread based on the color, you know?
I 100% agree. I feel like a lot of the times, like, it's not really thought about in that way. Like, I think a lot of the money gets invested in, like, the machine, the fabric, the patterns, and then the last thought is going to be like, "Oh, okay, like, now I have something at home I can use." But
Yeah,
you've already kind of gone, like, all the way and,
I
like,
know.
accumulated all these materials to, like,
Yeah.
make the project, but the thing that puts it together and holds it all together over time is going
I
to
know.
be actually your thread. So
It's
it's
so
super
true.
important to actually that you choose like a good thread, and that's the thing you're going to be using almost the whole time to put it together. So you want to enjoy using it as well, and using a nicer quality thread definitely helps with that part.
And I gotta say, I love that Wonderfil. Honestly, the thread is, even though you're talking about these very specialty threads, they're actually in a lot of cases less money than some of the other threads. You guys are really well priced. I got to hand it to you. And I love that it's a Canadian company. You're coming to us today from Calgary, right?
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
in Calgary.
And tell us just a little bit about Wonderfil, because maybe people aren't really understanding. Like, we get a lot of Canadians tuning in here. And so it's nice for them to understand that this is a Canadian company.
For sure. So, we actually were founded, I would say like the Wonderfil label has actually been around since the year 2000. And I think like a lot of people don't know that Wonderfil is a family-owned company. So
Yep,
my dad actually started
that's
the
right.
company. So I did grow up with the threads all around, and I have spent time, making little packs of thread growing up and stuff like that around
My
the
kids
kitchen
are living
table
similar childhoods, I will
when 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 we were like young, and the company was still growing and stuff. I definitely remember those moments, like sitting in front of the TV and like folding some boxes and things like that.
Uh-huh.
But I would say that we started with actually the embroidery threads, like the rayon, the polyfast that you're using today.
Yep.
But my dad's background has kind of been from like an engineering architecture type background. So he's always really kind of focused on like the why and the how and kind of finding like good solutions and kind of being inventive with like creating like all these varieties of threads and tools for the threads and thinking about like why we need them, like what should they be used for, and not just really kind of like what everyone else has, we need that as well. Like he really thinks about like the gaps in our line or like what we can do to help achieve like a beautiful result for the end consumer and
Yep.
have a good experience. Um, with the thread as well. So we now have 36 different thread lines from 100 weight all the way to a number 3 pearl cotton. And like you mentioned earlier, there's like rayon and poly, metallic, glow in the dark, holographic, wash away thread, iron fusible thread, wool thread.
I know.
Pretty much
And
we
it's
have it
really
covered
incredible.
now, I would say.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And it's great when um it's a thread company. It's not, a company that makes thread and makes needles and make all kinds of different things.
Mhm.
And so I appreciate that. And you can always, like, you know, just from our point of view, we now
Yeah.
like, buy thread for our store. We buy thread for our events. We buy like massive quantities sometimes from you guys. Are like, what? You need how many spools? And somebody always picks up the phone. Someone's always willing to, like, yeah, here, take some samples to this event, or always willing to like help find a solution for whatever it is we're doing. And I gotta say, like, your dad is the first one to even text back and say, absolutely, let's just get it right. Oh, you need it in 2 weeks, let's just get it right from the factory right to you. And it's amazing, like that. Those are the kinds of things that the consumer may not know about, but
Mhm.
that you should know when you're choosing Wonderfil, that there's real, Canadian family behind this that's pulling off this amazing product. And I gotta say, giving it at a really competitive price point so that we can look at some of the American counterparts and go like, yeah, look, you can get this one just as good, if not better, with more selection for all these different jobs. And, you're buying from home.
Mhm. And I would say, like, another thing that we really focus on because there's such a variety of product out there, not just from us, but from other people, like, we really care about education at Wonderfil, we call it THREADUCATION. So,
Jason,
like
that's what we're doing
so,
right
like,
now.
that's what we're doing right now, and that's why, like, it's always amazing to have these opportunities, like, thank you so much for having us today to even talk about this kinda stuff because it's so important to actually learn about the different types of thread. I would say most people kinda stay within that 40 and 50 weight kinda category, and they don't know about, the different types of weight and what they might do, or they're really comfortable just using, like, cotton, and they don't know why you would use other types of thread. So that's why we try to provide as much education as we can through doing collabs like this and coming on and speaking, or even through our social media. Everything is really education forward
Yep.
and like focused on giving people like tips or more information about all the thread.
Well, because the better everyone does with their equipment, the more we get to make. And yeah, maybe that means you sell a bit more thread, and maybe the sales will come inadvertently, but I tend to do that too, where it's like, obviously we're going to buy whatever machines in our budget, and we're going to buy whatever threads in our budget and all that kind of thing. But I want to learn along the way. Even if I'm not buying something right this second, I do want to know, why is my machine jamming? Or why is it so linty? Why is this happening to me? Or, oh, when I go to do, maybe I don't even have an embroidery machine yet, but you're tuning in because this little gingerbread house is just so cute that someday I would want to make something like that. And you'll keep these tips in mind, or you'll come back to Facebook to this talk and, tune in one more time and have a listen, because like wherever you are on your sewing journey, I do think it's important that you learn some of the best practices, learn what you can get away with, learn what works tried and true every single time, and learn what's going to sort of let you, let your project sing. There's nothing worse than investing all this time in something only to be like, yeah, it really does look like I made it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, especially like with, all these like nice materials that you that you have in front of you, it definitely is nice to pair it with like a good quality thread. And like you said, just kind of like learning and knowing what's out there is super helpful, because you might not need it now, but when you go maybe next time to like attempt some of these projects, having that knowledge will make you feel so much more confident in like approaching it. And it's really not very scary to like try these different things at all.
And you know what? We now have included in our retreat box, like we've got our quilting retreat box for this year that just went out. Quilting 101 has shipped, and they all contain Deco Bob. And in it is a little presentation, and we talk about it during the opening live about how this is going to keep your pieces laying much flatter. We did a bunch of in-person quilt shows over the summer and into the fall, and we gave out free Deco Bob to everybody that came to our booth.
Oh, wow.
Free Invisifil to everybody that came to our booth, just so that they could give it a try. And if you never buy it, that's fine. Use that whole spool and give it a try. We know that when you iron those seams flat, you're going to have a better experience. When you try free motioning your own quilt, when you've used Deco Bob instead of like a 50 weight cotton or a 40 weight, whatever it is, that you're not going to have that little hump that you have to contend with when your points come together. And so I kind of think, hey, if it costs us a little bit of money to show people a better way, then it's worth it. So I appreciate you being here and talking with us today, while I dunked all my pieces for my little gingerbread house here.
I feel like I want to make that gingerbread house now. It's so cute. Isn't
it just the cutest? Like maybe tune in a little bit later, and I'll have it all put together. These things don't come together in just 1 hour, as we all well know, but I think you're going to get a glimpse of how it's going to look. And, this is the one I'm doing this year. The whole collection is on sale through OESD. I'm going to call it up here. Hold on. So if you're thinking about the gingerbread house, you can see it camera 4 there. This is the gingerbread house that I'm making this year. A few years ago, I did the entire winter village, and it was all in white lace. And so maybe I'll post a video on that a little bit later so people can take a look. But I got to say, it was back when, like, it was probably 3-4 years ago, and I knew far less about thread. And it's funny how this gingerbread house is coming together this year, when I've learned so much more over like the last 4 or 5 years about thread, and how much far fewer breakages. Like that was the number one thing I noticed, because I thought, am I really going to tackle another village? Because they're, it's a labor of love.
Yes, it is.
And I love being able to set the machines and then go and do something else. Like I vacuumed the whole basement during one, because you don't have to, because the thread doesn't keep breaking. In the
You don't have
previous
to babysit it as much.
Yes, and that was my favorite thing. Lie flat, be strong, whatever. If you don't break, I like you, you know? So that was a big one I noticed this year in doing parts of this village compared to doing the village that I've done in the previous years. Is there any parting thoughts you want to give us on any of your thread lines? I put a couple out here. The ones that we kind of talk about most often. We've gotten very, very, romantic with soft lock as of late.
Ooh.
Yeah. We have included soft lock in our Serger 101 kits. And so a few hundred people have gotten those in the last little while who are taking Serger 101. If you want to learn how to use your Serger once and for all, we're including we have, tons of spool of designer thread in there, plus the soft lock. We're doing the rolled hem on the napkins, and the soft lock is included in there. And it's a beautiful, woolly, thick, perfect for filling in the gaps. Mirage, which is the variegated thread from Wonderfil. So gorgeous. We've got lots of that. That's, very, very popular thread for thread painting and any kind of decorative stitches and embroidery. And one of the ones that I said that we give away at the quilt shows is Invisifil. And
Ooh.
I love, and I'm just going to grab this quilt over here for a second. You guys just take a look at I'll switch Invisifil. Why don't you tell them what Invisifil is while I get my quilt?
For sure. So Invisifil is 100 weight thread. So that's going to be pretty much the finest and the finest end of the scale. You're not going to really find a thread that's finer than Invisifil. It's the same weight as silk thread, so super, super fine. And so when you're using threads that are that fine, why you use them is because you don't want to see them. So it pretty much will replace using silk or monofilament, which is monofilament is not really my favorite to sew with. And monofilament shines as well, whereas Invisifil really just like hides in a quilt, and it's amazing for a lot of things. So I see you have a quilt example there. One good thing is if you ever quilt over, lots of colors, you don't want to change your thread, you just want to see the texture of your quilting and not really the thread, Invisifil is a top choice for that. If you want to do a lot of like micro quilting where you're doing dense quilting, but you don't want your quilt to, be stiff, and you want want the texture to look really beautiful as well, again, Invisifil is a great choice for that. And I would actually also say for, English paper piecing or applique, I can actually show some examples of Invisifil being used in those instances.
Okay, I'm just trying not to knock all my threads off my shelf here, which I'm sure I'll do. But yeah, while you call that up, I'll just point out this is the quilt that we're making in Quilting 101. And I've just straight line quilted, perfect for beginners. And when you see in the overhead here, exactly what you said, where we can see the lines of the quilting, but I don't see white thread stamped through all of the different colors. And I'm not changing this to pink. It's still the same color thread running all through, but it's so fine and so thin that if you're wanting your fabric to stand out and you don't want your quilting to just be like, a magic marker, kind of graffitiing over your beautiful fabric, I think Invisifil is such a great option for that.
Absolutely. I actually have a photo that demonstrates exactly what you're talking about there. So here I have a quilt that obviously the piecing is kind of like the star of the show, right? Like I don't want a thread that's going to really interrupt the pattern and kind of be too in your face, when really the piecing is what I want to show. And you have so many colors. You've got like darks, you got light colors, you got warm colors, and even cool colors all in the same piece here. And Invisifil is definitely the go-to choice when it comes to something like that. And I have a closer up image. You can see I actually just used one color all the way through this entire quilt, not changing one time. And even when I go close up, you can see kind of like the closer up image on the right. You can barely tell what color that is, and it's actually a light gray that I use
Yeah.
for the whole thing, and, like, even through all the peach, it almost looks like it's taking on the color
Well,
that
that's what we say
that's
in this.
shown.
Yeah, and when people come in the shop and they're choosing a color of Invisifil, I always say you're only seeing a color because it's all wound on the spool. Like, it's only
Exactly.
because you see it all like this that you even notice that there's a color at all. You're really just
Mhm.
choosing a hue, because it's,
Exactly.
yeah, it's so thin and so fine that it's going to just sort of take on the color of whatever is behind it without being a clear thread.
Exactly, and clear thread, I always say, has a shininess to it as well, so if it's ever under light, it actually looks a little shiny sometimes, which
Mm,
doesn't actually help hide it at all. And
right.
another great use of Invisifil is actually stitch in the ditch. So if you use a lighter weight thread to ditch, even when you pop out of your ditch, you don't see your thread as much.
Yeah.
We did the same example, like left and right, purposely coming out of the ditch, trying to match a color when all 4 colors aren't really the same color at all, and you can see when you come out of the ditch with a heavier weight thread, you're gonna
Yeah.
see it a little bit, whereas with
Yeah.
Invisifil, you don't really see it at all. So we call this just stitching in the neighborhood. You don't even have to stay in the ditch.
Well, I love that idea for when you're wanting to, if you don't want to hand bind your quilts
Oh,
and
yes,
you're going to
binding's
stitch in the
another thing.
ditch. Yeah, exactly. When you want to bind your quilt with machine, but you don't
Mhm.
want to see those stitches. Wow, look at this, what you've got.
This
Nice.
is really, really tiny quilting with Invisifil. So you
Wow.
can see it's really, really stunning, and you can do really, really tight, super, super tiny little stitches. And I was gonna show earlier some English paper piecing. It's fantastic because you don't see the stitches in the seams, and your piece is actually gonna lay a lot flatter as well. Because if
Mhm.
you think about what's in a seam, it's your thread and your fabric. And you
Yeah.
can't reduce the amount of fabric that goes in your seam, which is almost always the case. You have to look somewhere else to
Yeah.
reduce that bulk, and that is going to be with using a finer weight thread. So I even tell beginners, like, if you wanna make it look like you're really good at it, use a finer weight thread, and you don't even have to improve your actual skill because the thread will make you look so good.
Yep, our
And
101 participants are loving it. The paper piecing club that we've got going on, loving it.
that's awesome. And this is some hand and machine applique. So I'm kind of zooming in, but even with the machine applique, you can barely tell that there's stitches on the
Right,
edge of this
right.
leaf. And from
That's, yeah,
afar,
that's,
they look
yeah, no.
exactly the same, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Wow. Well, listen, Calista, thank you so much for all of this today. Like, it's been so great having you here. It's been fun just talking thread while I was finishing, this kind of process on my gingerbread house. I'm gonna get it all together. If you're not following along in our Facebook group, the Jennifer Tryon or the Homemade with Jennifer Tryon Facebook group, go and ask to join. It's a private group, and it's where you can post any of your questions. If you have thread questions or sewing machine questions or Cricut or crafting or watercolor, whatever questions you have, like, we're in all the games. So we love making everything. So please, you can join the group, and we look forward to seeing what you're making there. Like, post pictures, get lots of, great pats on the back from other people who are making too. So that's always fun. Calista, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I had just as a good time too because I got to watch you make this while I don't usually have someone else to watch while I talk about thread, so this
I
was really
know.
fun for me too.
I know. Well, it's always nice to have a little inspirational project, going, especially this time of year. We're all in the making mood, and I love that we can kind of build on this like year after year. And I'm going to get this constructed. Next time you see me, this will be together. So
I
that's
can't wait to
my
see it.
Yeah, that's my promise. Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you being here this hour. There is so much more to come in our 24-hour sew-a-thon, craft-along. We've got something new coming up every single hour, and so don't miss it. I mean, if it's crafty, we're doing it over the next 24 hours. So be sure and tune in. Thanks so much for being here with Callista, and we'll see you all in the just about 10 minutes. Okay, bye.
Sounds good. Bye. Thank you. All right, Jennifer. Oh, is there anything else you need from me?